Greetings, men of 222. It's great to be with you today. And we're going to talk about the elite force today. And I didn't use, the character that we use is Jethro, and I really didn't refer to that other than I'm just going to tell you that he was Moses' father-in-law, and he gave him incredibly good advice when he told him that he needed to delegate. And I think that that's worth your looking up if you're interested in that. Today I want to continue with our 222 manhood language talk. And in that we use elite force to indicate that dads are in the cutting edge, perhaps even the bleeding edge of society. In God's plan, the family, led by the father, is the frontline unit. And a good father protects and provides for his family. Everybody knows that, but not everybody does that. And we know that a good father sticks it out when times are tough. And believe me, they will be tough from time to time. The reason Satan attacks the family so fiercely is because destroying the family diverts attention from fighting Satan and fighting his realm. You know, it creates lasting wounds that cause us to spend time healing instead of being able to tell others about Jesus. Now, how important are fathers? Well, Robert Lewis says in Raising a Modern Day Knight that femininity cannot bestow masculinity. If you really think that through, femininity cannot bestow masculinity, that means that single moms have a problem. And it's things like the Crusaders that help single moms bring their children so that they have an influence of a man in the young person's life. You know, one of the most vivid memories that I have as a high schooler was my father driving over an hour to see me play baseball in his busiest time of the year. I remember him walking in. I was playing center field, and I remember him walking in down the left field line. And I was actually stunned. Truly I was, because it was tax season. It was very busy. And yet my father thought enough of me to drive all that way and to come and watch me play. Instead of, for example, if he had some free time, going out and playing golf, which he loved in a great, great way. In Patrick Morley's book, The Man in the Mirror, Morley tells this story. He said, Gordon MacDonald tells a story about a man named Boswell, who was the famous biographer of an English writer named Samuel Johnson. And Boswell frequently mentioned a special childhood memory. Imagine this, a day fishing with his dad. Apparently, Boswell's life had been deeply etched for the better on this single day, for he constantly referred to the many matters that his father had tutored him on about that on that one occasion. Well, many years later, someone stumbled across the following entry in the father's journal for that same day. It said these words are penned by Boswell Dad. He said, "Gone fishing today with my son, a day wasted." Now, I actually think personally that that's a positive thing, because whatever his personal feelings were, he must have effectively suppressed them since his son profited so much from that day. It would be more common for us to express our selfish displeasure and ruin the day for everyone, wouldn't it? You see, even those little times with our children make such a big difference. But his son had been deeply encouraged by the mundane affair, going fishing, and the memory became a cornerstone of his entire life. What seems like a bore and a waste of time can be a great inspiration to our children. They just need our time and attention. If we can learn to control our selfish desires, not lose our tempers so often, and encourage our kids, they will inherit a great legacy from us. But what if you had no dad at home, or perhaps he was a lousy dad? Psalm 68:5 tells us that God is the father of the fatherless. We are not, nor should we be, victims. If you had a lousy father, turn to God and be his son. But do realize that no matter what situation that you're in, You control how your life will be lived. Be an overcomer, not a victim. If you had a bad father or no father, you're in the right place. And others are, when we go and we search out men and men's fellowship, we can learn so much. The question is, are you asking? Are you listening? Are you paying attention? And the men that you're around would love to share their experiences with you. Biblically, one of the most fearful proclamations of the Lord is given to fathers when he says in Exodus 20:5, he said, "You shall not worship idols or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me." If we hate God, he will pass the consequences of our sin on to the third and fourth generations. Dads, we have a powerful challenge to help our children love God, to keep his commandments. And we can break the cycle of generational sin by loving God and honoring him. You know, you may not even realize that we have generational sin. I recognized one day when I was in an argument with someone, I argued just like my dad did. My dad's attitude was the loudest person won the argument. And I caught myself doing that very thing. And I appreciate that the Holy Spirit brought that to my attention so I could change. I don't do that as much anymore. Don't sell the Holy Spirit short in being able to redeem you. The Holy Spirit can do incredible things. And you may have to deal with some of the consequences of your dad's sin. But his alcoholism doesn't force you to be an alcoholic. His wandering eye doesn't force you to have a wandering eye. But a note of caution to young people, while God commands you to love God, he also holds you personally responsible for your choices. In Ezekiel 18:4, God says, "Behold, all souls are mine, the soul of the Father as well as the soul of the Son. The soul who sins will die." So even if you are cursed with a generational sin, it is you who are responsible for your actions and your behaviors. You need to understand that. You can't blame generational sin for the choices that you make. God is consistent, as he says in Ezekiel 33:11. He says, "As I live, declares the Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that the wicked turn from his way and what? And live." So it's our choice as to how we live and how we behave. And lastly, I want you to be encouraged because Exodus 20:6 says, "But I will show loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandment." That's thousands of generations. And so as a father, I am so excited about the fact that I break that generational curse, that sin curse. And you know what? For thousands of generations, they can prosper because of breaking that sin. Let me close this section with one of the most impactful stories I've ever read about a father. John Ashcroft had just moved from the governor's mansion in Jefferson City, Missouri to Washington, D.C. To become a United States Senator. And he said, "Some fathers deal with their sons eyeball to eyeball, others nose to nose." He said, "My father dealt with me knee to knee." The night before I was sworn into the Senate in 1995, my father arranged for some close friends and family, maybe 15 to 20 people, to gather for dinner. And my father eyed a piano in the corner and he said, "John, why don't you play the piano and we'll sing?" And I said, "Okay, Dad, I'll play, you name it." And the father said, let's sing "We Are Standing on Holy Ground," because that's how John Ashcroft's father saw him serving in the United States Senate. And the family gathered the next morning at a house not far from the Capitol that was maintained by a group of friends for the express purpose of bringing members of Congress together for spiritual enrichment. And at the time, Ashcroft did not realize how weak his father was. He later learned that his father had told an acquaintance, "I'm hanging on by a thread, and it's a thin thread at that, but I'm going to see John sworn in to the Senate. And as the family visited together, the earnestness of the senior Ashcroft's voice suddenly commanded everyone's attention. And he said, "John, please listen carefully." And everyone focused on John's dad. "The spirit of Washington is arrogance, and the spirit of Christ is humility. Put on the spirit of Christ. Nothing of lasting value has ever been accomplished in arrogance. And someday, I hope that someone will come up to you as you're fulfilling your duties as a senator, excuse me, and tug on your sleeve and say, 'Senator, your spirit is showing.'" John then knelt in front of the sofa where his father was seated, and everyone gathered closer. And John realized his father was struggling unsuccessfully to lift himself off the couch. And John said, "Dad, you don't have to struggle to stand and pray over me with these friends." And his father looked at him and said, "John, I'm not struggling to stand. I'm struggling to kneel." John felt overwhelmed, humbled, and inspired all at the same time. And that afternoon, John was sworn into the Senate. But the next morning, on January 5th, a friend awakened the Ashcrofts with the news that John's father had died. He said, "John, there's something you ought to know, and this was not a surprise to your dad. Yesterday, your father pulled me aside and said, 'Dick, I want you to assure me that when John gets to his assigned offices, you will pray over him, inviting the presence of God into those rooms.' And I looked at your father and I said, 'Well, we'll do just that. And as a matter of fact, we'll call you in Springfield and put you on speakerphone and you can join us for the conversation.' And his father said, 'John, the next thing I knew, your father grabbed me by the arm and he said, "You don't understand. I'll be with you, but I won't be in Springfield." He knew what was coming, John. He knew. In small groups today, you might discuss what type of legacy your father is leaving or what kind he left. You might discuss, how are you doing with your legacy? And what do you need to improve upon? Be specific in small groups so that men can help you and encourage you. So the takeaways for this week are 5. You never know when your child will take away a lifetime memory from an event. Make it worthwhile. 2, if you had no father or a bad father at home, you do not have to be a victim for the rest of your life. 3, we can break generational sin. 4thly, the soul who sins will die. We own our behavior. If our dad was a creep, we are the ones who own our behavior. And we will all leave a legacy behind. What kind of legacy will you leave behind? Are you being intentional about it? Are you working at it on purpose? Or are you simply letting it happen? See you next Saturday, Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise. Be intentional this week about your legacy and everything you do. Honor Jesus because he's alive.